Yeah, yeah, we got it going on this morning. Let's see. Trying to get this set up real quick. Good morning, good morning, good morning. We got the CPI data that came out, and it's starting to show tariff prices. Yeah, a lot of things did rise in that CPI report. Let's see, let me go over here. Yeah, so CPI started to show tariffs starting to show in that CPI data report that came out this morning. You really take a dive and a look at what went up and what went down. A lot of the things had a huge spike, but a significant spike on that report. Okay. Then we got news on Nvidia. Nvidia is up huge this morning on Nvidia news. Hold on, let me put this on mute. Go over there in a second. But we had big news on Nvidia, so we got to check that out. Nvidia news, 12 hours ago. Let's see. Oh, bro. No, I don't need that. Let me get back. I'm trying to go over here. Go right here. Share tab. This the Nvidia news that came out. Market receive a green light to rally that will have far reaching. Okay. Nvidia is the largest. Let's see. Right here. U.S. government's assurance that the license to sell, so they're letting Nvidia sell the chips to China. Nvidia moves to new highs. Another 50% gain is possible. Shout out to all Nvidia investors. We had excellent news. Green light to sell the chips to China. So it's something brewing behind the scenes between the USA and China for the USA to finally let them get those chips to China. So Nvidia had a good positive news today. That's why we had the $10 jump from 163 to 170. Nvidia is on the move, guys. Nvidia is on the move. Shout out to everybody that's invested in Nvidia. Shout out to everybody. Let's see, did AMD pop up? I think. Yep. Nvidia stocks are rising this morning, guys, over that news. Let's see. Yeah. AMD is up 5%. Nvidia is up 4.70%. Let's see about the new company I've been watching. A new AI company. Where you at? NVTS. Yep, look. NVTS is up. This stock right here, NVTS, this AI company, look out. It's $5-6 right now. It had a 7% jump. Matter of fact, it had more of a jump than Nvidia. a 7% jump. So we got good news on AI this morning. Excellent news. Let's see, let me get back up here. Excellent news. Let's see about the S&P 500. Got a good jump. Tesla got a good jump. So we got good news this morning, which is great, which is good. Appreciate y'all for joining me. I'm your host, the one and only Stock Sniper. Just going through these companies this morning. We had great news with the AI chips and Nvidia making deals with China, and we ready to rock and roll. Let me get a drink of my water. Now all we got to see now is what's going to happen when the market open in 6 minutes. We're going to see what's going to happen. As SPY starting to move up, 627. So I guess the market is not really tripping about that CPI data that came out this morning. We did have CPI data, and as I looked inside, it looks like that the tariffs on certain items, as we already knew, so the tariffs are starting to kick in. So we're going to start seeing some things go up in price. So, but overall, it kind of stayed the same. You really got to look inside of the report and look inside each category to see what effects tariffs have had on what sector of products and services. So appreciate y'all for joining me. I'm your host, the one and only Stock Sniper, as we go over the stock market early this morning. Let's see what Bitcoin. Well, we had a slight pullback on Bitcoin after all-time highs of 123. Starting to pull back a little bit, which is expected. It's expected to pull back a little bit after hitting all-time highs. But all eyes on Nvidia, all eyes on the AI market. As we get ready for this market to open, we got less than 5 minutes before we get started on this great day. So appreciate y'all for joining me. I'm your host, the one and only Stock Sniper, and this is my world. Yeah, this is my world. This is what I do every single day, Monday through Friday, 8:30 a.m. So let's see what else is going on.
Get your insight on this. Joost Hilterman, Program Director of Middle East and North Africa at the International Crisis Group.
Thank you.
Now, Israeli strikes in the Bekaa Valley in eastern Lebanon have killed at least 12 people. The Israeli Air
Thing is, while we are watching the stock market, man, look what's going on over there in Israel and Gaza. They still going at it.
to ceasefire being agreed between Israel and Lebanon back in November. The area's governor says the number of those killed is the highest in a single day since the truce. Let's go live to our correspondent Zaina Khoda. She's in Bekaa Valley in eastern Lebanon. So it looks like a significant strike on the country from the Israeli military. What more can you tell us?
Well, this is the deadliest day since November, since a ceasefire came into force that was supposed to end more than a year of hostilities between Israel and Hezbollah. But since that ceasefire, Israel has carried out hundreds of strikes targeting what it calls Hezbollah's military infrastructure and targeting Hezbollah's personnel. According to local authorities, 12 people were killed. There were more than a dozen Israeli strikes targeting 3 different locations. And one of of those strikes, 7 Syrian laborers were killed, and some of them members of the same family. 5 Lebanese were also killed. The local authorities did not identify them, but security sources are saying that they are members of Hezbollah. The Israeli military saying that it is targeting weapons depots and that it will continue to target as long as, quote, Hezbollah continues to plot to restore its military capabilities. We've heard this time and time again, Israel accusing Hezbollah of trying to restore its military capabilities after being weakened by last year's war. We also heard, the Israeli defense minister put more pressure on the Lebanese government, saying that it is responsible for what is happening because, the Lebanese government is under pressure from Israel, from the United States to fully disarm Hezbollah. It hasn't done so yet. It has been treading carefully, preferring dialogue with the group instead of a confrontation. And in fact, the U.S. envoy himself, Tom Barrack, who was here, last week, he said that the Lebanese president is treading carefully to avoid a civil war, to avoid a confrontation in the country. But no doubt, Lebanon is at a crossroads. The U.S. envoy even used that terminology to describe the situation, and many fear that these Israeli attacks are just going to increase as a form of pressure on the Lebanese state to act against Hezbollah.
Okay, thank you for that. Zaina Khora there for us in the Bekaa Valley. The monsoon rains are picking up across South Asia.
We got about 15 seconds left before the stock market open. I'm expecting a pullback on Nvidia, guys. I'm expecting a pullback. That's what I'm expecting. I'm expecting a pullback. Let's see if it happens. We're checking it out right now. Wait, no, we're not. Golly. Okay. Expecting a pullback on Nvidia. Market just opened. Let's see if we get the pullback. There we go with the pullback. Just like we said. Good pullback on Nvidia. Just like I said, good pullback at the opening. All shorts, all shorts. If you took a short, you better be getting out right now. If you took that short with me at the start of the day, you better be getting out right now. We were expecting a pullback. We were expecting a pullback. Why was we expecting a pullback, Stock Sniper? Because great news. We hit the high of 172, said 173. And of course, there are going to be people that's taking profits on the day trade, on the swing trade. So that was a common sense play right there. That was a common sense play. We already knew we hit 172.40, which we had a big uptake. We had a big news this morning. Of course, people are going to take profits. That held from yesterday, that held from Friday. A lot of take profit orders were hit. And guess what? Great short opportunity. You should be already out. If you took this short with me, you should already be out. You take your profits when you got them. So we moving on from that. Shout out to everybody that's rocking with Nvidia. Let's go.
After Israel issued new forced evacuation orders. Israeli strikes in the Bekaa Valley in eastern Lebanon have killed at least 12 people. The army claims it was targeting Hezbollah sites. The area's governor says it is the highest number of people killed in a single day since a ceasefire was agreed in November. And a ceasefire has been announced in the Syrian city of al-Suwaida after fighting between two groups killed at least 30 people since Friday. Syrian government forces have begun withdrawing heavy equipment from the southern city. They moved in on Tuesday to intervene in fighting between the Druze and Bedouin tribes. Russia says NATO is not interested in peace in Ukraine, a day after U.S. President Donald Trump announced a new plan to supply weapons to Kyiv. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister says Moscow is ready to negotiate, but it will not accept any ultimatums. On Tuesday, Trump threatened severe sanctions on Russia if no peace deal is reached within the next 50 days. Our White House correspondent Kimberly Halkett has more.
A major shift in policy announced on Monday by U.S. President Donald Trump.
This is a very big deal we've made. This is billions of dollars worth of military equipment is going to be purchased from the United States, going to NATO, etc. And that's going to be quickly distributed to the battlefield.
Trump announced the deal alongside the NATO Secretary General, who encouraged Russia to make peace.
Speed is of the essence here.
Russia has also been put on notice. Make a deal to end the war with Ukraine or face unilateral tariffs of 100%.
We're going to be doing very severe tariffs if we don't have a deal in 50 days. Tariffs at about 100%.
Trump's decision to send Patriot air defense systems and batteries is a plan proposed earlier this month by Ukrainian leader Zelensky. It comes after Trump's repeated attempts to end the war through conversations with the Russian president.
I felt that we had a deal about 4 times. And here we are, still talking. And I'm not happy.
President Trump's decision to send billions in defensive weapons to Ukraine is an about-face in U.S. policy. Earlier this month, the Pentagon announced it was pausing air defense missiles to Ukraine, citing a dwindling U.S. weapons stockpile. But Trump says Putin hasn't been serious about negotiating peace. That's why secondary sanctions, tariffs to cripple Russia's economy, are also being considered for countries who buy Russian oil and gas.
I speak to him a lot about getting this thing done. And I always hang up and say, well, that was a nice phone call. And then missiles are launched into Kiev.
Unlike previous weapons shipments paid for by U.S. taxpayers, the new weapons to Ukraine will be purchased by NATO and distributed to the battlefield within days. Kimberly Halkett, Al Jazeera, the White House.
Well, the Ukraine.
Whoever's watching NVIDIA, look, oh, whoa. Let's go back to NVIDIA. Who's ever watching NVIDIA, guys? We're about to break that 142.40 of this morning. About to break it. We're about to break it. 142.40 right here. We're about to break resistance. A lot of good news, a lot of good business with NVIDIA. So we will break this 142.40 to hit more all-time highs. 142.40. $142, $172.25. NVIDIA had, not just NVIDIA, but AI has good news this morning. Business with China is back on the table. So now it's back on the table. We got the news this morning. Let's revisit the news. There's a lot of news going on this morning. Let's revisit. Right there, along with CPI report, Nvidia and AMD, China chip sales, bank earnings. We about to have earnings this week, guys. A lot of these companies going to start reporting their earnings this week. Earnings report. So this is why, right here, this is why Nvidia, basically all AI companies are spiking this morning. Right here, it's biggest day. That's why. Okay. Let me get back over here.
Russia is ready to negotiate after Trump's comments, but does not accept any ultimatums. But generally speaking, it seems like Russia has expected harsher sanctions. And it's quite interesting that when Trump announced the new measures against Russia, prices on the Moscow Stock Exchange started growing and increased by several percent. Many here believe that Moscow would manage to buy time, as 50 days to conclude the peace deal
What's
looks
up,
like
ATM
enough
Till?
room for maneuver for Russia. Russia's ex-president and deputy chairman of the Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, has said that Russia did not notice Trump's ultimatum. He called it a sham ultimatum, saying that Europe was disappointed and Russia did not care either. While analysts here say it will be hard to replace oil exports from Russia. It will be difficult for Trump to impose 100% tariffs on buyers of Russian oil, and they're asking whether the US president is ready to completely spoil relations with China, India and Turkey, the countries which buy Russia's cheap raw materials. Yulia Shapovalova, Al Jazeera, Moscow.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian drone strikes have hit Voronezh in southwest Russia in the biggest attack on the city since the war began. 16 people were injured, several buildings damaged. That's according to the region's governor. The Russian Defense Ministry says 55 drones were shot down overnight. Attacks were also carried out in the regions of Belgorod, Kursk, Lipetsk and Rostov. Let's get more on all this with Ben Aris. He's the founder and editor-in-chief of BNE Intelli News. He's also former Moscow bureau chief for the Daily Telegraph. He joins us live from Berlin. Many thanks for your time today. Do you think US President Donald Trump would have agreed to providing these weapons if NATO had not agreed to pay the US for them?
Well, my working assumption of Trump, I think the way to look at him is he is purely transactional. And he famously calls himself a businessman, and he thinks first and foremost in terms of deals. And for him, clearly, the money has been an important thing. I mean, he's been complaining about the amount of money that America has been spending on this war from the beginning. And I think that had NATO not agreed to take on the burden, in other words, to start paying for all of these weapons, he wouldn't done it. He wouldn't have done the deal. And you know, regardless of, I mean, as Rory was reporting from Kiev, there's big questions over what systems will be delivered. And the key from the Ukrainian perspective is they need particularly these Patriot missiles, this air defense, to counter Russia's bombardment with missiles. They need those as fast as they can. But I think from Trump's perspective, what he's just done is a $10 billion arms deal. And so for him, it's immaterial or secondary, at least, as to how quickly these weapons get to the field. And that remains the big question. Trump was talking about 17 batteries. He was specific about it, which is the big and would be a game changer. I mean, in all of Europe only has 18 batteries, of which Germany itself has 12. So if you take the total up to over 20 batteries in Ukraine, that's an iron dome shield over the country. But you dig into the details, and Pistorius, the German defense minister, said actually these are missiles that we ordered in the States, and they're not going to come, not for days or weeks, they're not going to come for months.
Right.
And so in that sense, it doesn't make a difference. The steel makes money, but it doesn't help the Ukrainians.
When you look at it from NATO's perspective, are you surprised by the extent NATO has stepped up here? I mean, essentially, they're indirectly subsidizing American weapon producers. That's quite unprecedented, isn't it?
They're directly subsidizing. I mean, America is effectively taking itself out of the game, and
then focusing on the fundamentals and credit quality becomes so much more important moving forward.
Laura, let me just follow up on that, because is this one of those calls from a Jamie Dimon where we appreciate today, but a week from now, the markets are off their highs, and we go back and think, well, Jamie Dimon called the market top. Is that, what do you think he's trying to say here?
You know, I think that the banks in particular have many policy backdrop components that they've been benefiting from and may continue to benefit from moving forward. Last year, the Fed cut rates by 100 basis points. That helps steepen the curve. That tends to be constructive for bank earnings. More volatility means more sales and trading revenue, which can bolster bank earnings as well. And we're looking at a deregulatory backdrop moving forward that might be more favorable to the banks. I think the real challenge is if we see demand destruction as a result of tariffs or other policy changes moving forward. That's really where the challenge for the banks comes ahead. And so, if nothing else, I see this as a way to hedge the elements of the economic backdrop that a CEO can't control right now.
Ali, I asked Jamie Dimon on a call with reporters this morning why he called out elevated risks or elevated asset prices as a risk. I mean, he kind of laughed at me a little bit. He giggled. He basically said, well, look at the alternative would be stocks would be down. But he did bring up a good point in that the market is pricing in a soft landing. And I thought that was a very good thing to call out.
Yeah, and if you even take a look at the inflation data, right, we have yet to see those tariffs really affect consumer prices. We did see a little bit of signs, apparel prices ticking up, footwear ticking up, but used cars, new vehicles, those prices dropped. And that's an encouraging sign at where we're at. Now, at the same time, economists have been saying we saw a lot of front loading. Tariffs are going to take time to work their way through the system. So it'll be interesting to see how investors react to that. But then earlier this morning, we saw Bank of America released its fund managers survey, and it did say that sentiment was getting toppy, but that equity positioning is not yet extreme, even though it's overweight. So that is a positive sign moving forward that perhaps this rally can continue. Perhaps we can achieve the soft landing. Of course, Brian, as we know, the big TBD factor there is the Federal Reserve, what they decide to do when it comes to interest rates. And the CPI report that we got this morning pretty much tells a story that the Fed is going to remain on hold for the foreseeable future. We have markets pricing in basically a 100% chance that the Fed remains on hold in the next 2 weeks when we get that policy decision. And then September, we also saw odds dip below 60%. And that's pretty notable here since markets had consistently been pricing in a September rate cut. But it seems like markets are now thinking, maybe we could see a cut in December or maybe not even at all this year. And I wonder how investors will react to that reality.
Laura, let me jump back to you here. You know, Dimon voicing his support for Jay Powell and the Fed's independence on that same reporter call. But going back to what he said about a soft landing, has the Fed already achieved that? Or in order to get that soft landing, it needs to cut rates at the end of this month at its meeting?
I think that if we look at the economic reality of the last couple of years, as much as it's felt tenuous and volatile, we have been living in a soft landing. Economic conditions have been very strong. And if anything, the main concern that most households are living with has been price levels, price growth over the last couple of years. And so the Fed, I think, has been right to be concerned about the risks to inflation ahead. I have long said this year that I think it's more likely the Fed cuts 0 times than 2 times over the course of this year. And that's because the Fed is in an important bind. The last 6 months, it's been very clear that the labor market and inflation sides of their mandates have been coming into better balance, that's a soft landing. But as they look ahead, the risks to both a tightening labor market as immigration policy changes and higher inflation as trade policy changes, those are things that the Fed can't control, that their policy rate doesn't do a lot to improve. And so I think it's more likely that we see less out of the Fed than more.
Brooke, I know you are an avid watcher of egg prices inside the Consumer Price Index, but I'm not going to ask you about egg prices today. We're going to push them off the curve for a second. I looked at the rest of this report, and I didn't see a lot of inflation. You know, my read was that the likes of a Walmart, Target, a lot of these big retailers might just be eating these tariffs instead of passing them on to shoppers.
Yeah, Brian, after so much warning this past earnings season about those higher prices coming for consumers, what we saw in this morning's report was just a few key areas of higher inflation. I know that Ali hit upon a few, but one that really stood out to me was furnishing. When you think about furniture, we saw it up 1% month over month. That was the biggest gain that we saw since January 2022. And what was interesting to me is that we saw this rise in prices back in March, and then in June, we once again saw those rise in prices in furnishing. And largely, what might be happening there is we saw this pull forward of inventory, all these retailers really bulking up. Well, now, Brian, those same retailers need to get ready for the holiday season. And so what I saw from a Bank of America survey is that there was meaningful improvements in furniture when it comes to exports to the U.S. from China. They rebounded notably in the month of June. Those were up 5%. When it comes to those exports from China to the U.S., also lamp and lighting, those also saw higher prices. And what we're really seeing here is these retailers, they need to ramp up their inventory ahead of back to school. They need to ramp up their inventory ahead of that key holiday season. And now's the time to do it. What also happened in June is we got that reprieve in those U.S.-China tariffs. That sort of gave the green light for these retailers to say, okay, we're not at that 145%. We back down to 30. Now could be this key window ahead of what was July 9th to get that inventory ahead on the shelves. And we saw a bit of that when it comes to apparel and furniture.
Point well taken, or points well taken. And we're also locked in on all things Nvidia off its H20 news. Those chips look like they'll be headed back to China. And I want to call up the earnings estimates for Nvidia. You can find these on the Yahoo Finance platform, but you can see how they've really fallen down versus 90 days ago, in large part because of unknown related to the not only just AI demand going forward, but what will happen with this China business. We now know, Lauren, and it's likely now estimates will have to climb for Nvidia, but do they also have to climb for other companies that play, other tech companies that play in China? And then how are you thinking about the tech trade moving forward?
I always hate to answer a question like this as a two-handed economist, but I think that we have to. This foundational layer of artificial intelligence is so important. There's a reason why we've seen these companies be gainers throughout the last couple of years as the AI trade has unfolded. They are so essential to moving this technology and these business processes forward that we're all looking forward to. And the news that we're seeing with respect to China is certainly positive news. Whereas an economist and a market strategist, I have some hesitation, is that there's not very much that investors or even these companies can do to influence the major geopolitical shifts that we're seeing globally. And when it comes to sales in China, or really US-China competition around this technology supply chain, I anticipate ebbs and flows in that dynamic. And so as policymakers try to decide, will the US be more open to collaboration with China and Chinese companies on these technology supply chains, or will they not? Companies like Nvidia and like many of the other Magnificent Seven and technology enablers are going to be in the middle of that fray.
And the S&P 500 NASDAQ hitting fresh record highs about 13 minutes into the session. And Ali, that really brings up the other point here. For records to continue to be hit on the major indices, tech has to work. And if you are bullish on the broader markets, you have to like this news out on Nvidia today.
Absolutely, Brian. This was a big question mark for Nvidia, especially as we gear up into earnings season. The China business is so important to this company. And like we were just talking about, it could potentially signal an olive branch when it comes to U.S.-China trade relations. But the tech industry and the tech rally has really kept these broader markets afloat here. We have Nvidia trading at a $4 trillion valuation, hitting its own record highs. There's no coincidence that that's happening at the same time that the benchmark S&P is also chugging higher. And I've asked strategists point blank, what is more important to this market if we do not see Fed rate cuts or if we see Nvidia deliver a bad earnings report? And 9 times out of 10, they always say it's Nvidia delivering a bad earnings report, because right now AI is just such an important theme within this market, within productivity, and Nvidia is the leader there. So they have to keep leading in order to see these gains be sustained.
You know what's important, Ali? If Jensen Huang takes over for Jay Powell at the Fed. I mean, that would be absolutely mind-blowing. What a hell of a week of coverage here. That would be on Yahoo Finance. All right, everyone stay right there. We'll be back with more opening bid and our question of the day and stock of the day. Your clue, stock of the day is a company that is very tied to all things Nvidia.
Space. We've spoken a lot today about the foundational layer of artificial intelligence, the semiconductor chip makers, manufacturers. We haven't spoken as much about the infrastructure layer, the energy companies. And then there's a third layer, the application layer. And this is where many companies outside of Apple have had more early releases, opportunities for their customers to deeply engage with new functions related to AI and what that can do in their daily lives. And that application layer, we are really only in the very earliest, I would even say pre-stages of what that will look like, not only for us as consumers, but also for businesses and the technologies that they use to enable their workforce. And so I would say the jury is still certainly out over who the winners and losers will be. And elements of data and personal security, where Apple has historically been strong, might be areas that gain more importance as this application layer builds out.
Ali, I'm going to decode this movement in Apple in real time. I'm using my iPhone to download AI applications from everybody else. And until Apple comes out with its own AI functions, they need to do, they're unlikely to regain that story, that bullish thesis.
Yeah, and that's a big reason why we've seen these year-to-date declines. They've just disappointed on the AI story. And fun fact for you, Brian, Nvidia is $1 trillion larger than Apple at the current moment.
That's a good fact. That's a good one.
That just gives some perspective here. But to Lauren's point, the use cases on the consumer side for AI, we just haven't been there yet. And that's an area that down the line, Apple could potentially double down on it, and we could see that momentum. Right now, it's really focused on those hyperscalers, a lot of B2B. For a company like Meta, that's been utilized by its advertisers, especially its smaller advertisers. So that's why we've been able to see these outside gains in some of these other Mag 7 companies. Apple, typically, they're not the innovators here. They usually sit back, they wait for the innovators to do their thing, and then they come in and make a better product. So that could be something that we see down the line here. Apple also focused on that user privacy data. We have seen some, shaky data with ChatGPT, Gemini, those types of products. So again, something that Apple might just want to sit on their heels and wait a little bit.
Just fix Siri. Please, Apple, and tell us things aren't going to be bad in China. Big thank you to my contributors today, Lauren Goodwin, Brooke DePalma, and Ali Canal. Coming up, Yahoo Finance's Market Catalyst. We bring you the news behind the market moves for the trading day. Do stick around.
Good information right there, guys. Good information. So let me move over here. We got a pullback on Nvidia. We got a pullback on Nvidia. Let's see what AMD is doing. Pulling back. Let's see what Apple got going on. Pulling back. Mostly seems like everybody is following Nvidia. Shout out to Google and YouTube. Let's see. Nvidia. So we got, check out Apple. Apple is kind of following AMD. And VTS, the new guy on the block. I had somebody ask me about ETFs. About to, let's see, talk about ETFs a little bit until they come back. A good ETF, if you don't know what an ETF is it is a exchange traded fund. The top 500 companies are all inside of an ETF. So let's look at a few ETFs that I kind of like. VOO. So I'm gonna go over here and look up which companies are in VOO. We're gonna look at VOO Holdings. Let's see. Share this instead. This is VOO, the ETF I'm talking about right now. It is kind of pricey, but we got Apple, we got Microsoft, Nvidia, Amazon. Shout out to Amazon, Facebook, Berkshire Hathaway, Google, AVGO, Tesla, Google. Of course, Google have two different tickers. These are the sectors that they are in, that VOO is in. 31% technology, financial services, 13%, healthcare, 10%. So you can see it's like a VOO has a lot of skin in the game on a whole lot of different companies. A whole lot of different companies. I love VOO. Let's see, maybe I can do that from here. It's VOO. This is one ETF. I talk about all the time. SPY, the S&P 500. A lot of these ETFs have basically the same companies in them, but it might be a different percentage, might be a different company. So let's see, chart history, holdings. Gonna go over the holdings. This is the S&P 500. As you can see, you gotta look yourself. You gotta look at these ETFs yourself and find out which one you go with. Microsoft. In the SPY S&P 500, Microsoft is the top holdings. Microsoft, Nvidia is number 2, Apple, Amazon, Berkshire Hathaway, Google, Tesla. And here go the percentages over here. These are kind of, pricey, but some ETFs, I like this one. It's kind of cheaper, SPYG. I like this one. It's $96. And if you look, some of the holdings, you got to do your own research to see all 500. I'm not going to go through all 500 of them. See, you can look and see Nvidia, Microsoft. And here are the sectors. Of course, a lot of these ETFs are going to be heavy tech. But you can see the different sectors that is built up in this ETF, which is it's a baby of the SPY. It's called SPYG. It is 96. Let's see. Let me go through another one. So that's all you got to do is look up ETFs and then look and see which one is right for you. For long-term investing. And they all pay dividend. This is another one. I like this one a lot. SPLG. I like this one. It's at 73 right now. But you know, of course, if you know, a lot of these ETFs or a lot of these companies are at all-time highs right now. A lot of them are at all-time highs. So you got to keep that in mind. Performance. You can look at the performance year over year. Holdings on this one. It's like right around $70. Microsoft, Nvidia. You can see, and you compare the difference between the different ones and see which one is right for you. If you want the big boy, a lot of people love VOO. And you can look, go down and look, take notes, look at the performance, right? You can look at the performance. Year over year. You can look at the holdings. Nvidia is number 3 on the list. You can look at the chart. And of course, all of these ETFs and basically just about all these companies are at all-time highs. So yeah, so if you like new, this is where you start at. All the companies that we know, like, and trust are inside of these ETFs. It's basically a portfolio put together for you already. They're called ETFs, and you start right there. And then as you are investing, you start learning. You start taking notes, like what I'm showing y'all right now. You start taking notes. The internet is a great place for learning information about investing. It tells you all this. You look at this stuff. Well, what is a net assets? You go to your phone while you're on your computer, you Google it, and you take notes. And you have your book. I got mine right here. You educate yourself on these investments and on these terminologies, but you don't overwhelm yourself. You make it real short and simple. That's why I say, if I was new, I would start with the companies I know, like, and trust, which are inside of these ETFs. And then I will branch off and buy these companies individually, 1 share, 2 share, 3 share, and build a portfolio of these companies that we know, like, and trust. Because guess what? Holdings. This is the mindset we gotta have, guys. If I'm gonna use VOO as an example. No, I'm gonna go to, because it's kind of expensive, I'm gonna go back to SPYG. Or SPLG. SPLG, which is $73 for 1 share of SPLG. Okay, you go to the holdings, basic holdings. You can do your own research to really get a hold of all 500, which is the 500 top companies in America or in the world. We got Microsoft. I'm using Microsoft right now. Nvidia. I got Nvidia products inside my computer right now. Apple. We all got Apple phones. Amazon. We all use Amazon. Facebook, which is Meta. Meta owns Facebook, Instagram, and all the text. I can't think of the other companies, but you get the drift. Facebook, AVGO. If you don't know what AVGO is, you can click on it. Broadband, and you can look. You can go over here, profile. What is Broadcom Incorporated? And it lets you know. Okay, then you go back. Then you go back, okay, now I know what AVGO is. Google, everybody knows what Google is. We on Google right now. Google owns Facebook. Google owns YouTube. Google, shout out to YouTube. Google owns YouTube TV, etc., etc., etc. Again, another company that we know, like, and trust. So that's get quotes for top holdings. So that's just a quick little tip. A quick little tip. You don't know nothing about the stock market. You know more about the stock market than what you think. All you got to do is go with the things you know, like, and trust. Any Android stock. Yes, Android stocks are inside of this ETF. But at the bottom side, these are the top 10s. You have to really go in depth to really get the whole listing. And, Uber is one of the 500. DoorDash is one of the 500. These are just the top 10, that you get to see up top. I'm not going to go through the whole 500, but you get the idea. This is just, a little introduction. You got to do the work yourself. You got the internet. It ain't like it was when I first started investing. When I first started investing, there was no internet. There was no phone. Was none of that. So it's very easy to invest right now. It's very easy to educate yourself about this stock market. Not just about the stock market, also about real estate, anything, which we all know that already. You just got to put the work in. But it's so easy because you start with the companies you know, like, and trust. And if you already know, like, and trust them, that's 50% of the work is already done. It's already done. All you got to do is change the way you think about it and put the work in. So let's go back over here. So I appreciate y'all for joining me. That's just something I want to explain right there. I hope that helps somebody out. Oh, here we go, guys.
Minister Israel Katz said they've instructed the Israeli military to immediately strike regime forces and weaponry deployed in the Az-Zawaida area in Syria. That's in response to actions taken by the regime against the Druze population. This is a violation of the demilitarization policy adopted earlier, which prohibits the deployment of forces and weapons in southern Syria. Israel is committed to preventing harm to the Druze in Syria due to the deep brotherly alliance with Druze citizens inside the country. Joost Hilterman is Program Director of the Middle East and North Africa at the International Crisis Group. He says Israel is exploiting the unrest in Syria.
Israel, in my view, has a dual purpose. One is to secure its interests in Syria, to keep the country weak and divided along ethno-sectarian lines. That is an old-standing policy, not new, and not only in relation to Syria. Secondly, it tries to justify it by standing up, in its words, for the Druze community. It's not clear that the Druze community in Syria wants Israeli support. The main problem that Syria faces today, and that we see play itself out in the case of Sueda, as we saw it on the coast earlier and in the Druze suburbs of Damascus in April, May, is the weakness of the central state, which is, of course, a newly emerging state that still has to build its security forces and has to unify its security forces. And that's a long-term project that's not done overnight. And what we're seeing is that the government is simply not strong enough to impose its will and to impose the monopoly of arms over the country, as is the right of any central government. Should that happen, then we can see that these local squabbles, in a way, well, they start like local squabbles and they can become quite lethal, can be contained.
Still ahead on Al Jazeera, Palestinians in the occupied West Bank are setting up barbed wire around their homes to protect themselves from attacks by Israeli settlers.
World.
I think Jay Powell is trying to keep his eye on the ball. And for him, the ball is the inflation rate and getting the inflation rate to the Fed's 2% target. It's a little bit above the Fed's.
We talked a little bit about this yesterday. How do you think that not just Jay Powell, but the rest of the Fed members are sort of processing what's going on in the outside world?
Trump won't Jerome Powell to cut those interest rates.
I think Jay Powell is trying to keep his eye on the ball. And for him, the ball is the inflation rate and getting the inflation rate to the Fed's 2% target. It's a little bit above the Fed's 2% target. Frankly, I think the political posturing is going to be a bigger issue for the Fed next year than it is this year, when there's a new Fed chairman in there who may have made some commitment to the president to cut rates aggressively. Ironically, if Powell gives the president what he wants and cuts rates now, then the next Fed chairman is going to have less room to cut rates and give the president what he wants next year. I want to say one other thing about the inflation story. Frankly, I think there's too much attention right now on the tariff effects and not enough attention on just the underlying rate of inflation. The Fed's goal is 2% inflation. So let's say there's been very little effect of tariffs so far. The inflation rate is still a little bit above the Fed's 2% target. And what we saw with the number today is consistent with that story. We had 4 straight months of readings that were low of 0.2 or below. And this month we got a reading of 0.3, which is consistent with like a 3 to 4% inflation rate. I like to look at the price of a haircut. I think that tells you something about the rate of domestic inflation. The biggest inputs in the rate of a haircut are labor and rent. And that's going at a rate of 3.5% to 4%. That's got nothing to do with tariffs. It's got nothing to do with the exchange rate. It's the domestic economy. And I think the Fed doesn't have inflation at the 2% goal. It's really, in my mind, they're going to find it hard to justify cutting rates a lot in the months ahead if they're hovering a little bit above the 2% rate objective, inflation rate objective, regardless of what tariffs are doing.
Breaking news, we got to make the Hills and Rath haircut index. Heard it here first, folks. That's what we're going to be introducing to the economic world.
You can see the chart on my LinkedIn page. I just posted
Eric, is part of this that the Fed needs to bring down that inflation target? or I should say bring up that inflation target, excuse me. Is that part of the issue here?
So look, the Fed can't change the inflation target. It's no good changing a target when it's convenient to do so, because then you lose credibility. I think it's reasonable to argue that the target should have been set higher when they originally set it, but it's a little bit late to do that now. It's just you can't change it midstream without risking your credibility. I disagree with John to a certain degree, though. I don't think the Fed has to wait. In fact, I think it would be a mistake for the Fed to wait until inflation is all the way back to target before they contemplate cutting rates.
But what's the argument for cutting rates sooner?
So the argument for cutting rates sooner is that inflation tends to lag the economic cycle, right? If you wait until it's all the way back to target, you have almost certainly waited for the economy to weaken too much. So I agree, you need to see downward momentum, and I think that the Fed agrees with that too. But take the counterfactual. The Fed did cut rates last year. If they hadn't, rates would be quite significantly higher now, and I don't know that anybody really thinks that would be appropriate for the economic circumstance. The Fed, much as they are data-driven, also needs to try to be forward-looking, and when you see indicators that suggest inflation is going to come down, you want to respond to that. I'm pretty confident that were it not for the tariff overlay, the Fed would be cutting rates right now. I think the underlying dynamics are consistent with the gradual progress toward that target. It is the uncertainty that's restraining them. And we can debate whether that's appropriate policy or not. Within the Fed, there's a debate. If you think about the dot plot right now, roughly half the committee doesn't think they're going to cut rates at all this year, and another half of it thinks they're going to cut rates at least twice. So these are reasonable disagreements to have. But unfortunately, from a market perspective, this is a disagreement that's going to persist because the data aren't giving us a clear answer.
John, what do you think of that view?
Look, can I take the bait on this debate? And I think you answered my response, which was that the Fed has already cut interest rates. They cut interest rates by a full percentage point last year. They did some of those rate cuts before the election and some of those rate cuts after the election. So some of them may have benefited Biden and some of them benefited Trump, but they got the short-term rate down a full percentage point, and now they're waiting to see if there's follow-through and if inflation is continuing to recede. So is it continuing to recede? I think another way of looking at this is I just don't think the neutral rate, the rate at which the economy is producing either less inflation or more inflation, is where the Fed puts it. The Fed has said,
Tim, Android is owned by Google. Google owns Android. I forgot to add that in there. But yes, Google is in these ETFs. Android is in the ETFs. Android is owned by Google.
Ask about the personnel side of this, because I think that's really important right now too. The Washington Post reporting yesterday that Kevin Hassett is sort of rising in the ranks in terms of a potential contender at the top of the Federal Reserve. A lot of people have been saying to us, the Federal Reserve is not one person, it's a committee, right? It's a board of governors. So, but nonetheless, if you get someone who is effectively closely allied with the president, what effect do you think that's going to have in the markets?
So I think the concern in the markets is that if you get someone closely associated with the president, that the decisions made on monetary policy won't be made for economic reasons. And that is a problem, at least a potential problem. We have seen the impact of central banks not being independent globally repeatedly, and it's not a pretty picture. It's not something that I think anybody would want to see repeated here. It is true that the FOMC is a committee. I think it is improbable that if a new Fed chair came in, that the direction of monetary policy would swing immediately. I think it's improbable that any of the candidates under consideration, Kevin Hassett, Kevin Warsh, any other Kevin you want to pick, would come in and immediately cut rates by 3%, simply because even if they wanted to, the committee wouldn't go along with them. That said, the committee has historically been very deferential to the Fed chair, and I think it's reasonable to think that the new chair, as long as they are making a reasonable argument, will have the committee's support in doing that. But again, the key emphasis there is it has to be a reasonable argument based on the economics. And if you bring someone in who argues that rates should be lower just because they should be lower, that's going to be a problem. I would expect to see the yield curve steepen. I would expect to see rates go up at the long end, not down. I think it would be counter to the administration's objectives. And I think the equity market would respond poorly to that.
Yeah, and I suspect that the argument that rates should be lower because of the cost of servicing U.S. debt, probably also not a convincing argument for the committee. Guys, thank you so much. Eric Winograd, John Hilsenrath, good to see you. Coming up, we got to check on the markets 1 hour into trading, plus some of the biggest trending tickers of the morning.
4 times. And here we are, still talking. I'm not happy.
President Trump's decision to send billions in defensive weapons to Ukraine is an about-face in U.S. policy. Earlier this month, the Pentagon announced it was pausing air defense missiles to Ukraine, citing a dwindling U.S. weapons stockpile. But Trump says Putin hasn't been serious about negotiating peace. That's why secondary sanctions, tariffs to cripple Russia's economy, are also being considered for countries who buy Russian oil and gas.
I speak to him a lot about getting this thing done. And I always hang up and say, well, that was a nice phone call. And then missiles are launched into Kiev.
Unlike previous weapons shipments paid for by U.S. taxpayers, the new weapons to Ukraine will be purchased by NATO and distributed to the battlefield within days. Kimberly Helkett, Al Jazeera, the White House.
Rory.
Well, at least they'll be selling the stuff instead of giving it to them. That's pretty good news. The thing is, they're talking about all this money that America is bringing in lately. When are they going to start helping the American people? That's the next question. In a minute, Trump keeps telling us all this money that America is making as of lately. When will the powers that be, when will these guys say, okay, some of this money that we making, we're going to issue it back out to the American people? Yes, it's good that you are selling this equipment to make some money, but the thing is, where's the money going to go? Where's the money going to go? I think that they need to start putting this money back to the people. Start helping the people a little bit more. After, they start building. After they start building the money up, let's see if they're going to kick it back. That's what we need to see. So I think I'm going to end it right here, guys. I appreciate y'all for joining me. We had good news this morning as far as the AI sector goes. We had good news this morning. Shout out to everybody that pulled the trigger on Nvidia, AMD, and all these AI companies way back when. Shout out to y'all. Y'all portfolios are looking real lovely right now. So I think I'm ending right here, guys. Hope y'all have a great day. I appreciate everybody for joining me. Everybody that's been subscribing to the channel, I appreciate you. Everybody that's been watching, everybody that's been commenting, everybody that's been commenting. I appreciate y'all, man. So with that being said, to the next one, this is the one and only Stock Sniper. I'm out.